Research on childhood emotional neglect shows a consistent pattern. The adults most likely to apologize for everything, for taking up space, for having needs, for existing in a room, didn't grow up in homes with obvious cruelty. They grew up in homes that looked completely fine from the outside. Homes where the emotional atmosphere was quiet in a specific way. Your feelings were registered somewhere between inconvenient and invisible. Not punished, not mocked, just not quite met. And somewhere in that atmosphere, you learned something. You learned that your presence required justification, that needing something required an apology in advance, that the safest version of you was a smaller one. This video is about that lesson, specifically where it came from, why it's still running, and what it actually means that you're still doing it 30 years later. Because it doesn't mean what you've been told it means. So what does everyone get wrong about this? If you've ever looked up why you apologize so much, you've probably found the same answers. Anxiety, low self-esteem, people-pleasing, maybe a mention of codependency. And those words aren't wrong, exactly, but they're incomplete in a way that matters, because they describe the symptom and call it the cause. Saying you over-apologize because of anxiety is a bit like saying you limp because your leg hurts. It's true. It tells you nothing. Here is what those explanations miss. The over-apologizing isn't a glitch in your nervous system. It isn't a bad habit you picked up somehow. It is a communication system. A precise, functional, internally consistent system that you built at a very young age to solve a very specific problem. And here's the thing nobody tells you about communication systems. They don't dissolve when you understand them intellectually. They dissolve when you understand what they were originally communicating and to whom. Researchers who study emotional neglect have documented this pattern across populations. When a child grows up in an environment where emotional needs are consistently unmet, not violently dismissed, just quietly unacknowledged, the child's nervous system doesn't conclude that the environment is the problem. It concludes that the need is the problem. And it begins to build strategies around that conclusion. The over-apologizing is one of those strategies. It is not a personality trait. It is historical evidence. And there is a difference. Let's get specific about the kind of home this tends to come from. Because it probably didn't look from the outside like a home where anything was wrong. There was food. There was structure. Maybe there were activities, achievements, a certain kind of care. The adults weren't cruel. They weren't absent in the literal sense. But something was consistently off, in a way you couldn't name then, and maybe still struggle to name now. The emotional temperature was managed. Feelings were noted and then redirected, or met with a solution before they could be felt, or received with a kind of mild discomfort that told you, without words, that this was not the right moment, that there wasn't really a right moment. And you, because children are extraordinary observers, you learned to read that discomfort. You learned what kind of you the room could hold. You learned that the emotional version of you, the one that needed, that felt, that occasionally fell apart, made the air in the room slightly harder to breathe. So the part of you that learned to apologize first, before needing, before speaking, before taking up any space at all, that part wasn't fragile. That part was brilliant. It was solving for connection in the only way available. It was saying, I know I'm a lot. I'm sorry in advance. Please don't go. That is not low self-esteem as a fixed trait. That is a child doing the most intelligent thing possible inside a system that didn't have room for them. And that makes a very specific kind of sense. The problem, the only problem, is that the system kept running. Long after the home, long after the childhood. Into every room, every relationship, every ordinary Tuesday. Still apologizing to people who never asked for it. Still justifying an existence that never required justification. Which brings us to the layer underneath. What is the apology actually saying? Here is the thing worth sitting with. When you apologize for asking a question, for sending a follow-up email, for having a feeling someone else didn't expect, what is the apology actually saying? Not the surface version, not I'm being polite, the layer underneath. At some level, the apology is saying, I know I take up space you didn't plan for. I know my need is an inconvenience. I'm preempting your irritation so you won't withdraw. It is a bid for permission to exist in the room, sent automatically, without conscious thought, before anyone has indicated they want you to leave. And here is what nobody tells you about that bid. It was the right bid once. In a specific emotional environment, with specific adults who communicated, without saying so, that your full presence was a bit much, the preemptive apology was functional. It kept the peace. It kept the connection. It was, in the most literal sense, adaptive. The research on childhood emotional neglect keeps returning to this same mechanism. When a child's emotional needs are consistently met with subtle discomfort, the child doesn't stop having needs. They learn to apologize for having them. And that apology becomes the price of admission they charge themselves every time for the rest of their lives. That is what's been happening, not anxiety as a personality trait, not weakness. A lesson that was accurate once and has been running on a loop ever since in every room that isn't the original one. This is not a character flaw. It is a lesson that outlived its usefulness. The part of you that learned to apologize before entering wasn't damaged. It was paying a toll it genuinely believed was required. The work isn't to shame that part. The work is to show it slowly, carefully, that the toll booth isn't there anymore. This video named one pattern. But what most people who grew up in homes like this discover is that the over-apologizing isn't the only behavior running on that old instruction set. There are usually others, equally habitual, equally invisible, equally rooted in the same early lessons. If you want to see the fuller picture, there's a resource in the description called the Pattern Decoder. It maps 30 adult behaviors back to their childhood emotional neglect roots in one sitting without needing a dramatic backstory to recognize yourself in it. Link is in the description and in the pinned comment. So now, the part everyone wants and the part most content gets wrong. How do you stop? Here is the honest answer. You probably can't stop it directly. Not yet. Not by trying. And the reason isn't willpower, and it isn't commitment, and it isn't how serious you are about changing. It's that the behavior lives at a level faster than conscious decision. By the time you've noticed you're apologizing, you've already apologized. So trying to stop the apology by catching it before it leaves your mouth, that's fighting a reflex with a thought. The reflex is faster. Every time. What actually interrupts the mechanism is something smaller and, at first, less satisfying. It is not stopping the apology. It is noticing it, 2 seconds after it happens, and saying, internally, quietly, "There it is, that's the lesson." Not with frustration. Not with shame. Just with recognition. Because here is what that 2-second pause actually does. Every time you've apologized in the past, you've been inside the pattern. You've been the child in the original room, paying the toll, not questioning whether the booth is still there. The moment you notice, even 1 second after, you are no longer inside it. You are watching it. And that is a completely different position. That is the first time your nervous system gets to register. Something is being observed here. Not fixed. Not stopped. Observed. That observation is the beginning of a gap. And the gap is where change lives. You are not behind on this. You haven't been doing it wrong. The fact that the pattern is this persistent isn't evidence of how broken you are. It's evidence of how good you were at surviving a specific kind of environment. The lesson worked. That's why it stayed. Now you're just working on letting it know, slowly, without force, that the environment has changed. If this opened something, the next step is already there. Link in the description and in the pinned comment. The Pattern Decoder goes 30 behaviors deep, with the same logic this video used on just one. It's built for exactly the person who just thought, what else is in here that I haven't named yet? When did you first notice you apologize for things that aren't your fault? And what did you tell yourself about it at the time? So here is what to hold on to when you leave this video. The next time you hear yourself say sorry for asking, for needing, for taking longer than you thought you should, for having a feeling in front of someone else, you don't have to stop it. You don't have to fix it right there. You don't have to do anything except notice somewhere in the background. There's the lesson. Because what that noticing means is this. For one moment, you are not the child in the original room. You are an adult who can see that room from the outside. And you can see, maybe for the first time, that what looked like a personality trait was actually a response. Precise, functional, invented under specific conditions. The child who built that response wasn't weak. They were navigating an emotional environment that didn't have room for the full version of them, and they found the most intelligent path available. They learned to apologize first, so that maybe, just maybe, there would still be someone thereafter. That lesson has been running a long time before anyone gave it a name. Now it has one, and the name changes things. Not immediately, not completely, but in the specific way that names always change things. You can see it now. You can stand slightly outside of it. You can say, the next time it moves through you, I know what you are. I know where you came from, and I'm not inside you right now. I'm watching you. That is not a small thing. That is where it starts. You're not broken. You're fluent in a language you didn't choose to learn. And the fact that you're here, looking at where it came from, asking what it means the part of you that was always there, before the lesson, before the apology, before you learned that needing was dangerous. That part is still looking for you. It has been waiting a long time. It can wait a little longer. But it doesn't have to.